Lesson tonight is on anxiety, and I guess I was a little anxious to get up here. So, um, these two sermon Sundays are nice. We get to spread out the work a little bit on the Sunday evenings and allow some of the men to put together a sermon. And often the case is we put together a sermon on what we've been thinking about for a long time. And this is exactly what this has come about from. Be anxious for nothing, as Kevin just read from Philippians. That's hard, right? If we're really honest, that is hard to do. Tonight, I just want to start a conversation, right? Because anxiety wants a lot of things from us. And one of the things that it wants most from us is to not talk about it. Anxiety does not want us to talk about it. It wants us to suffer in silence. So tonight, we're going to talk about it. And I hope this starts a conversation between you and somebody, you and God, you and your spouse, you and starting a conversation so we can start working on this together. To be anxious for nothing. And tonight, I'll use a lot of words, and the scripture uses a lot of words like fear and worry and anxiety and panic. And we're going to kind of all group those together as we talk through these things. But I just want to make one thing clear. I'm not talking about the kind of fear that we reserve for God, right? Matthew 10, when God says, you shouldn't fear the ones that can only hurt your body, but you need to fear the one who can hurt your body and your soul in hell. There is a special fear, a reverence that we reserve for our God. And I'm not talking about that fear tonight. I'm talking about the fear, the worry, the anxiety that says, what if? Right? What if this or that happens? What if I don't get any better? What if I fail? What if I'm not doing enough? What if they make fun of me? What if they don't like me? What if I can't pay my bills? What if something happens? That's the kind of fear and anxiety and worry that we're going to talk about tonight. And worry and anxiety, they're very visual, right? It's our imagination. We use our imaginations to make these visuals in our minds. We conjure up these mental pictures of what bad thing might happen. See, I'm going to use a lot of visuals tonight. I just want to disrupt the visual anxiety and the visual pictures that we make in our minds about what might happen. Okay? I like trees. Trees are a very powerful thing. Be anxious for nothing. Again, anxiety is a very visual part of our brain, a visual part of our world and our imagination. And I'm going to put up a couple more pictures that maybe you can relate to. Let's look at this in a very visual way. Maybe you sit and think and stew about good things and bad things, and it's just this mishmash of just conflicting thoughts that you can't get out of. Or maybe it's just overwhelmed with just confusion and dizziness, and it makes you anxious. Maybe you're just so wound up and there's just so much going on in your mind, like the what ifs or the bad things, or how's this going to happen? How is this? This can't happen. We can't do that. And it's almost like a bomb about to go off in your mind. Right? Anxiety is powerful. It can take over. It can trap us. It can trap us. Sometimes we feel like we're a prisoner in our own minds, right? When we're stewing about the same things over and over and over again, things that we think are going to happen. And you know what? They very rarely ever do. Maybe we were just treading water in our minds. Maybe we have social anxiety. Maybe just being around people makes us anxious. And maybe sometimes we just get so paralyzed, and we're nail biters, and we just can't move. We're just, the anxiety just grips us. Let me ask you this question. What's the most common command in the Bible? What's the most common command in the Bible? Don't fear. Don't be afraid. Fear not. That more than any other, you can go through, and any more than any command that's given in the Bible, whether it's by an angel or by the Lord or by somebody, a prophet, whoever, the most common command in the Bible is don't be afraid. How do we do that? How in the world do we do that? When we're so bombarded with so many things, how do we not fear? How do we not be afraid? How do we not worry about all these things that might happen? How can we be anxious for nothing? Dale passed out a worksheet for filling out. Tonight we're going to go through Scripture and pick out just quick 10 things that maybe one of them will be helpful to you. I pray that at least one of these things out of the Scripture is going to be helpful to you. If more, great. But again, what anxiety doesn't want us to do is to talk about it. And tonight, we're going to talk about it. We're going to go through a couple of the Bible stories, which is really interesting because if you go through almost every Bible story that we have, somebody gets anxious or worries about something and makes a mistake and sins. You can go out, you think about Abraham saying, Sarah, you got to lie. You got to lie, they're going to kill me. You got to say that you're my sister. What if you say the truth? They're going to kill me. Right? The same with Isaac and Rebekah. You can think about Moses and the burning bush. God says, go. And he says, I don't want, I'm scared, basically. And he gives all these excuses. And finally, he goes. And the 10 spies versus Joshua and Caleb, they were afraid, right? They were worried. They were worried about the size of the Canaanites, that they would lose. Almost every one of the Bible stories involves anxiety of some sort. But we're just going to hit a couple of them. And I know you can see this up here. David and Goliath, right? We've just been studying that in our classes. At one moment, you've got this young David who's just as fierce with faith, right? Goes up and he challenges this beast of a man with such faith and victory. God provides victory. And then it just seems like out of nowhere we get this, my heart shudders within me, right? Terrors of death sweep over me. Fear and trembling grip me. I said, if only I had wings like a dove, I would fly away and find rest. How far away I would flee. I would stay in the wilderness. How could we have this person of such faith and victory then utter such words that just shows just great anxiety and great fear, great worry? How could this be? You know what? David is just like us, right? That we can have moments of strength and faith in the Lord, but then something happens and we're just rocked. And we become very anxious about something. We became very worried about something. Go ahead and turn to Psalm 55. Something did happen to David. How did David handle his anxiety and panic? Let's just take a quick look at Psalm 55. Maybe your heading has a title of some sort for Psalm 55. Mine says, Betrayal by a Friend. Right? So David, this is a Psalm of David as he responds to a close friend's betrayal. And as we just read, he panics, right? He just wants to, fight or flight. We heard about this before. And he wants to flight. He wants to be like a dove and fly far away from this problem, this thing that's causing him such anxiety. All right? And we know that it was a friend that was betraying. If you look down at verse 12, it says, Now it is not an enemy who insults me. Otherwise, I could bear it. It is not a foe who rises up against me. Otherwise, I could hide from him. But it is you, a man who is my peer, my companion and good friend. We used to have a close fellowship. We walked in the crowd, with the crowd, into the house of God. So this man who was just, defeated Goliath, and then later in his life, his countenance, his faith gets rocked by a betrayal of a friend. Well, he shows us how he dealt with his panic. If we read a little bit later in verse 16 and 17, he says, "But I call to God, and the word will save me. Evening and morning and at noon I utter my complaint and moan, and he hears my voice. He redeems my soul and in safety from the battle I wage." And verse 22 says, "Cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never permit the righteous to be moved." And then ultimately in the end of verse 23, at the end of the psalm, he says, "But I will trust in you." Our first tip comes from looking at verse 16 and 17. What does he do? He says, "But I call to God, and the Lord will save me." And I want you to look at what he does. Does he just say silent prayers of calling? Is he just doing a silent prayer? No, he says, "Evening and morning and noon I utter my complaint and moan, and he hears my voice. He redeems my soul in the safety from the battle I wage. I cast my burden on the Lord, and he sustains me, and I will trust in him." So tip number one, if you're writing these things down, talk out loud to God about what weighs you down. Right? When we're anxious, we want to stay in our minds. We want to stay inside of here. What anxiety doesn't want us to do is to take what's in our minds and put it out loud. Say it out loud to God. And this is also a tip from, some of you may know, Sewell Hall. He talked a lot about doing this, about how his mom taught him to pray out loud to God. And he said at first it seemed really silly as a kid, but after a while, it made God more of a companion to him, that he could talk to God. And what was in his mind and in his heart was not just stuck down in there, but it was now out, and it was bouncing off the walls, and it was hearing and making it to God. So tip number one, just like David, talk out loud. Utter your complaint. Utter what weighs you down out loud. And not even just a whisper. Talk to him like a person. Talk to him like your companion is in the room. And that may help you. That may help take the weight off. Let's keep on moving. We're going to come to another David story, right? The same David who defeated Goliath with faith and vigor says these things, right? "When I kept silent, my bones became brittle from my groaning all day long. For day and night, your hand was heavy on me. My strength was drained as in the summer's heat." Go ahead and turn to Psalm 32. Psalm 32. This is a psalm that comes after David reflects on what happened with Bathsheba, right? What was he keeping silent about that was causing him so much physical pain and anguish, right? After Bathsheba becomes pregnant, David panics, right? And he conspires to cover up his sin. He had Uriah killed. The Lord was upset, obviously, and sent David to confront him. David confesses, "I have sinned against you, Lord." And Nathan replied, "The Lord has taken away your sin. You will not die." All right, let's think about that for a minute. This time between the sin with Bathsheba and now, David was holding something in, right? He was trying to cover this all up. And David had reason to believe that he would die for his sins. He feared this, and he tried hiding it instead of facing them. What was David trying to keep silent about? What happens when we keep silent about our sin? What do we call that? We call that a guilty conscience, right? So tip number two, a little bit more broad. determine the core reason for my anxiety and work from there right away. The core reason for David's anxiety in this situation is he had a guilty conscience about what he had done, right? And that may be for us too. Maybe you're anxious because you've done something that you shouldn't have done, and you haven't confessed that or made it right. That can cause a lot of anxiety. It can make your bones heavy. It can make you feel terrible. And when you confess those sins, confess that thing you've done wrong, you feel the weight come off. You feel that weight. And what was the core reason for David's anxiety in the first psalm that we read? It was a broken relationship, right? That can cause a lot of anxiety. A lot of things can cause our anxiety. What is the core reason if you are having anxiety? You have maybe a guilty conscience, a broken relationship. Maybe there was some trauma. Maybe there was abuse. Maybe you're just under so much stress. Find the reason and work from there right away. And once you figure out what's causing your anxiety, don't wait. Don't wait. Start working on it. And a little bit of wisdom that I love from the kids and Emily and I, we'd gotten into the Lemony Snicket's series of unfortunate events, right? And a lot of you know that. And one of the girl, Violet Baudelaire, says, what does she say? I should have written it down. If we wait until we're ready, we'll be waiting the rest of our lives. Right? Let me say that again. If we wait until we're ready, we'll be waiting the rest of our lives. When you find out the cause of your anxiety, start working on it right away. And don't wait, because you're never going to be ready. You're never going to be ready to start working on your anxiety. You just have to start. And as you start and you get working on it with the Lord and with your brothers and sisters, it will start to go away. It will start to go away. All right, tip number 2. We'll keep moving. Another Bible story, this one. You might recognize this one as Elijah the prophet on Mount Carmel taking on 450 prophets of Baal. And in this great display of power and faith, there's God sends down fire and burns up the water-drenched offering. Elijah has all 450 of those prophets slaughtered, and there's just so much power. Like there's so much is happening, such a faith-building moment. And then 40 days later, you've got this man hiding in a cave. How does that happen? Just like David. How does this happen? He's just like us, right? He is just like us. And in 1 Kings 19, go ahead and turn there. 1 Kings 19, Elijah encounters the Lord. And this one, maybe the next couple tips are not so much for how we handle our anxiety, but maybe for how we handle other people's anxiety. Right? 1 Kings 19. So right after this whole episode on Mount Carmel, Queen Jezebel says, I want you dead. I want Elijah dead. Now. And Elijah panics. Even after what had just happened, he panics, right? He became afraid and immediately ran for his life. And after a day's journey into the wilderness, he sat down under a broom tree and he prayed that he would die. Right? That's pretty serious. He just saw what he saw, and now he's just panics, right? Panic is really just intense anxiety, right? And he lay down and he slept under the broom tree. And the angel appeared to him and said, get up and eat. And he did. And then he fell back asleep. And then it happened again. And then after that, he got up and he walked for 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Horeb and hid in a cave. That same Elijah that called on God to burn up this water-drenched offering, and he did, with fire. All right? Then the next day, God says, what are you doing, Elijah? What are you doing here? And this is what Elijah says. I have been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, but the Israelites have abandoned your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with a sword. I alone am left, and they are looking for me to take my life. You can feel the anxiety in that when you say it. God says, go out and stand on the mountain in the Lord's presence. And at that moment, the Lord passed by. And a great mighty wind was tearing at the mountains and was shattering cliffs before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there was a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was a voice, a soft whisper. A soft whisper. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. What are you doing here, Elijah? Same thing he asked before, and Elijah responds very similarly, right? I've been zealous. They've abandoned your covenant, torn down your altars, killed your prophets. I am alone, and they want me dead too. Well, what's God's response to that, right? Let's just take a look down here in 1 Kings 19 and verse 15. Then the Lord said to him, go and return by the way you came to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you are to anoint Hazael king over Aram. You are to anoint Jehu son of Nimshi as king over Israel, and Elisha son of Shaphat from Abel-Meholah as prophet in your place. Then Jehu will put to death whoever escapes the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death whoever escapes the sword of Jehu. But I will leave 7,000 in Israel, every knee that has not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. So how does God respond to Elijah, right? He says, get up, go back the way you came, and restore order, right? He says, you aren't alone. You think you're alone, but you're not. There are still 7,000 that have not gone the way of Baal. And the situation is not as it seems to you. And the Lord is in control. So what number am I on? Tip number 3. I am not alone. Don't hide. Don't hide. If you are anxious about something, don't hide it. You are not alone. Don't go and hide in a cave like Elijah. Share. So we're going to get 3 tips here real quick. Tip number 4. And this comes in that idea of the soft whisper, right? When somebody's anxious, or they're doing something that's making you anxious, we want to yell. We get angry. And we want them to do what they need to do, but they just can't. And God didn't come to Elijah. Elijah didn't come out of that cave when the fire went by or the earthquake went by, right? When the big, angry, loud things went by. He came out when the soft whisper, when he heard God in the soft whisper. And yelling at an anxious person is never going to help them, right? We need to have a soft whisper, and we need to be like God. We need to help them with a plan to get back on track. Like God said to Elijah, go, and you do this, and you do this, and you do this. And look, right? The situation is not as it seems. God is in control of reality, right? When we're anxious and we're creating all these what-ifs in our minds, that's not reality. God is in control of reality. The situation is never it never happens like we get so anxious and worried about, right? God is in control of reality. Trust in him. Let's move along. As Chase had pointed out this morning, that our songs can somewhat mislead us in our idea of what really happened. And I would say that art can also be very misleading to us when we look at the Bible stories. We see this picture, this painting that somebody did and said, this is Jesus praying in Gethsemane. We see it, if you do a search on Google and you look this up, Jesus in the garden, you will see so many old paintings of Jesus looking like this. What I read, he looks a lot more like this, right? A lot more like this. Turn to Luke 22. Luke chapter 22, we're going to start reading in verse 39. Just a couple verses here. He, that's Jesus, went out and made his way as usual to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When he reached the place, he told them, "Pray that you may not fall into temptation." Then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down, and began to pray, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." Then an angel from heaven appeared to him, strengthening him, and being in anguish, like this is anguish. That last picture was not anguish. This is anguish. Being in anguish, he prayed more fervently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. When he got up from prayer, he came to the disciples. He found them sleeping, exhausted from their grief. "Why are you sleeping?" he asked them. "Get up and pray, so that you won't fall into temptation." Right? So Jesus in Gethsemane, Luke 22, says, being in anguish, he prayed more fervently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. Even Jesus, God in flesh, became nervous. Really nervous. So nervous that he was sweating out. Right? And what did he do? He prayed fervently. "Not my will, but your will be done." And if you look, like he even says, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup away from me." That's almost like a what if, Lord. What if you take this away from me? But actually, no, Lord, what your will be done, right? And he got up and he went. So maybe tip number 6, and maybe you'll find comfort in this. In a moment when an anxious thought comes into your mind or nervousness comes into your mind, that even Jesus got really nervous. That even Jesus got really nervous. And the difference between he not letting that turn from nervousness to worry and anxiety is he didn't just sit there and stew on it. He got up and he went and he did what he knew he needed to do. And tip number 7, in the moment when we have an anxious thought or we're anxious or we're worried, we got to tell ourselves that it is not in God's will for me to worry or to be anxious, right? It's not in his will for us to do that. He wants better for us. He wants better for us. So we've gone through 3 stories now, and we still have a couple more tips to go. And it wouldn't be a lesson on anxiety if we didn't hit Matthew chapter 6, right? So go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter 6, and we'll hear from what our King has to say about anxiety. Matthew chapter 6, and we'll read a little bit for time's sake. We'll start in verse 25. "Therefore I tell you, don't worry about your life, what you will eat, or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Isn't life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Consider the birds of the air. They don't sow or reap or gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Aren't you worth more than they? Can any of you add 1 moment to his lifespan by worrying? And why do you worry about clothes? Observe how the wildflowers of the field grow, and they don't labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was adorned like one of these. If that's how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and thrown into the furnace tomorrow, won't he do much more for you, you of little faith?" And we'll stop right there. What's Jesus telling us to do here when we're anxious or we worry about stuff, like the what ifs? Well, what if we don't have food? What if we don't have money to buy clothes? Or what if we don't have gas for the car? What if, the millions of what ifs that we can have? What is Jesus telling us to do? Let's take a look at a couple pictures and just listen to it. Look at it. Think about it. Right? God's taking care of all these birds, right? He's going to take care of me. It's a beautiful thing to just really look at nature. And it does something to us, right? It's something that we really won't fully understand in this life, I don't think. When we can really look at nature and just smell it, touch it, listen to it, taste it, feel it. What do we call those? We call those our senses, right? God gave us senses. And what Jesus is doing here is telling us, use your senses to help you come to your senses. Right? When we are stuck in our thinking, when we've got this what if cycle of going through in our brains, what if this happens or what if this doesn't happen? Jesus tells us, get out of your home and go look at what our Father created, right? Go look at it. Go listen to it. Go feel it on your skin. Take your socks and shoes off and walk in the grass. Like, do these things. Tip number 8, we can come to our senses by using our senses. That's what Jesus is calling us to do. And when we do that, it takes our anxieties away. It really does. We see the great Creator and what He's been able to do, our Father, and it melts our anxieties away. When we realize that if He can do this and He takes care of this, He can take care of me. He can take care of me. Well, how can we help someone with anxiety? Maybe we're not necessarily dealing with it too much ourselves, but we have a loved one, a friend, a coworker that's really anxious. Right? There's a lot of good proverbs that can help us and give us some wisdom. Proverbs 12:25, anxiety in a man's heart weighs it down, but a good word cheers it up, right? As we can go back to that one where it says, let's not yell at an anxious person. That's never going to help. What might help, what's probably likely to help, is a good word. But also, what else can help? Turn to Galatians chapter 5. Galatians chapter 5. I've talked a little bit about what anxiety wants, right? Anxiety wants us to suffer in silence. Anxiety doesn't want us to talk about it. And what anxiety also wants is for you to be anxious from others people's anxiety. He wants us to become anxious by other people's anxiety. That's how that works. He recruits. Anxiety recruits, right? How do we fight against becoming anxious because of somebody else's anxiety? And I think that the fruit of the Spirit is really where we can really focus in on, right? If we look at Galatians 5:22, but the fruit of the Spirit is love. And that's not just the touchy-feely, kissy love, right? This is divine love, the love that always wants what's best for that person. If one of your loved ones or your friends is dealing with anxiety, and you need to love them this way. And that sometimes is tough love. That's not, I want to take their anxiety just away. No, I want to help them face their anxiety and help them through their anxiety. Not enable their anxiety, but help them disable their anxiety. Look at the next one, joy. We can't let other people's anxiety take away our joy. We need to find our joy in the Spirit. Having joy, our own joy from God, will help others regain their joy from God as well. And peace, patience, that idea of long suffering, helping somebody with anxiety, it can take a long time. And we need to be prepared for that, or else we can get drawn in and be anxious as well. Kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and of course, self-control. Well, if you have a loved one who's anxious and you're trying to help them, it's very, when you're with them, you're all in, right? You're trying to help them and be good and say the right things. But then when you're not with them, it's easy to just kind of want to numb and just step out of that world and say, okay, you know, maybe I'm not so into drinking, right? But I can sure kill that bag of Oreos right now, right? Or whatever the self-control is. I need to, when I'm not with that person, I need to still retain my self-control. So there's kind of a lot of words I just said and all that. I'm going to nail this down. Tip number 9, if we want to help somebody with anxiety, we need to first focus on the fruit of the Spirit. If I'm an anxious person and I'm trying to deal with my own anxiety, I'm probably not the best person to help you with yours. Okay? That's just reality. It's just going to make it worse. If we are really focusing on the fruits and we want to help and we can do that, then this is the fruit of the Spirit is where we need to look and really dive in. Okay, let's finish this up. Let's finish this up. A lot of words and a lot of tips. And maybe you're asking the question that I asked. And Emily and I, when preparing for this lesson, I asked her this question. I was like, is worrying sinful? Right? Based on everything that we've looked at. It's kind of hard, right? It's hard to really think about. And hard to answer. And there's a book Emily's been working through, and I asked her this question a couple weeks ago, and she was reading through a book, and she found this really good little passage, and I would like to share that with you. It's a scriptural-based book on anxiety. It's called Running Scared, Fear, Worry, and the God of Rest by Edward Welch. And he says in this one little paragraph, is it wrong to worry or to be afraid? Is it sinful? Maybe. But put these questions on hold. The emphasis in Scripture is, when I am afraid, I will trust in you. That's Psalm 56 and verse 3. The issue isn't so much whether or not we are afraid and worry. Scripture assumes that we will be afraid and anxious at times. What is important is where we turn or to whom we turn when we are afraid. The God who calls you to trust in Him when you are afraid will spend a great deal of time showing you that you can trust Him. He doesn't ask you to live with your eyes shut. Faith is not blind. The Hebrews who first received Scripture were very big on eyewitnesses, accurate testimonies, and evidence. Faith was about knowing God in an intimate, personal way and trusting Him because He is trustworthy. Faith sees more, not less. Tip number 10. When I am afraid, when I am anxious, when I am worrying, I will trust in you. I will trust in you. Psalm 56 and verse 3. What if, right? What if we turned our what ifs from thinking of the negative things? What if we turned our what ifs to what if about hope? And what if God does this really awesome thing? Right? What if God provides like He says He will all the time? It can change us. It can change the way we think about the world. It can melt away our anxieties. So let's go through the tips really quick one more time. Tip 1, talk out loud to God about what weighs us down. Out loud. Not a soft whisper, out loud. Like I'm talking right now. Like we would talk to somebody else, right? Tip 2, determine the core reason for anxiety and work from there right away. Figure out what's causing it. There's got to be a cause. It's not just happening. There is a cause. And you can figure it out and start working on it. Tip 3, you are not alone. I am not alone. We shouldn't hide like Elijah hid in the cave. Don't hide. Seek help. Tip number 4, yelling at an anxious person will never help. A cheerful word will lift the weight. Tip 5, God is in control of reality. Tip 6, even Jesus got really nervous, right? Maybe you find comfort in that. And that will help keep your nerves from progressing to the next stage of worry and anxiety and all the things that go on after that. Number 7, it's not in God's will for me to worry or to be anxious. It's in God's will for us to trust Him. Number 8, we can come to our senses by using our senses. Get out of the walls of your home and out of the walls of your brain and go and be in nature. Try some foods that you don't like. Just do something different out that wakens your senses and come back to reality, not into the what ifs of our brains. Number 9, first focus on the fruit. If you want to help somebody, pray and work on the fruit of the Spirit. And number 10, when I am afraid, as David said, when I am afraid, I will trust in you. I love trees. I love trees. Go ahead and turn to Jeremiah 17. This will be the end. Jeremiah 17. I like to look out our back window. We got some trees out there. And the birds are always in them. The squirrels are always in them. And it helps me. And maybe it'll help you. And I hope you know that this lesson that I gave tonight is not because I have any of these things perfect. Far from it. There are many times in my life where I've been very anxious. Panic attacks, yes. I've had lots of anxiety. Loved ones with lots of anxiety. So I hope this comes as a brother talking to brothers and sisters that we can help each other out. And this is a conversation starter, right? Don't hide. Let's talk about these things. Let's not let anxiety win. Because remember, anxiety doesn't want us talking about it. But as soon as we start talking about it, it's going to start going away. Okay? And as God always does, He provides us with so much evidence to believe in Him, so much evidence to trust in Him when we're afraid, so much evidence to trust that He's going to provide everything that we need, right? And He provides us with visuals, things, because we are visual people, and our imaginations are grounded in visual things. And so in Jeremiah 17, he says in verse 7 and 8, and I want to leave you with this. The person who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence indeed is the Lord, is blessed. He will be like a tree planted by water. It sends its roots out toward a stream. It doesn't fear when heat comes, and its foliage remains green. It will not worry in a year of drought or cease producing fruit. I want to be like that tree, that one. When I look out my back window and I see the trees, I'm thinking about that tree. And that reminds me that I can be that tree too with the Lord's help. I put my confidence in everything, no matter what happens. I can be like that tree that Jeremiah talks about. You can be like that tree, not shooken, shaken, whatever the word is, right? When anything anxiety-causing happens, that we can shake it off with the Lord's help. Maybe you're here tonight and you're dealing with anxiety. Let's talk about it, right? Let's not hide. Let's talk about it. We can help, right? A lot of people in here have been through some anxious times, and they're still here, right? So that we can help with the Lord's help. If you're here tonight and you want to be a Christian, and that's been weighing on you, we can help with that too. That'd be the right choice to do. Talk about getting rid of some anxiety. If you've been thinking about becoming a Christian, about giving your life to God, and you haven't been doing it when you know you should, when you know everything that you need to do and you haven't done it, just give your life over to God. He's going to take your anxieties away. If we can help you in any way, stand as we come forward as we stand and sing.